So obviously the church approves NFP or natural family planning. When we say that the sexual act must terminate or be completed in the kind of act that is in principle open to life, think of that in terms of the essence of the act as distinct from the accidents of the act. By accidents, we would mean the timing of the act, say if it's an infertile time of the month, or the particular people involved, say one or the other is infertile, either by, say they're young or old. That doesn't change the nature of the act. So the two goods of the sexual act, unitive and procreative, there's still plenty of reason for a couple, let's say they're past childbearing ages, or let's say they're a young couple and they're infertile, it's totally fine for them to engage in the sexual act. So we say it must be the kind of act. That's regardless of the timing of it, or regardless of the particular people involved. Let's say if one or the other is infertile, that doesn't change the nature of the act or the kind of act that it is. It's still rightly ordered in the church's eyes. Does that make sense? I didn't want to get the full. And again, when he uses language like possibility, a couple does not have to say, we're only doing this for the sake of children. It's merely respecting the possibility that they may come and not doing something positively to squelch that. Does that make sense? So it's not as if the only reason is children. It just, it would run contrary to the natural order to positively exclude that of your own accord, which you're not doing that if you're infertile or beyond childbearing ages or things like that. So hopefully that helps a bit. Okay, so what we're going to do next is, that's the rest of the story. So I'm just going to try to hit some highlights from the time, from 1979. So he becomes Pope in 1978, October of 1978, and just kind of take you through some highlights for the rest of the story and kind of bring everything full circle. Okay, so the first one, this is his first trip as Pope was to Mexico, but then the next one was to Poland, and this is called the 9 days that changed the world. This is an extremely, 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 extremely significant trip. In fact, it's this trip that actually triggers ultimately the downfall of communism. He was going to visit in May 8th, on the feast of St. Stanislaus, as they celebrated in Poland. Now, this was going to be the 900th year anniversary of the martyrdom of St. Stanislaus in 1079. This is significant, as we'll see in a moment, because St. Stanislaus, sticking up for the people, sticking up for human rights and dignity, challenged the king and then was put to death by the king. And the communists were very, they knew exactly the symbolism. And they said, no, you cannot come on May 8th on his feast day. They traded 2 days in May for 9 in June because they did not want him to come and hold St. Stanislaus up as the example of what was happening then in terms of state persecution of the church. Now just check this out. In effect, when he comes, this is why he was coming. Carefully to look out at the sea of expectant faces. This is the vigil of Pentecost, June 2nd. 1979. Paused and then gave what may have been the greatest sermon of his life. The crowd began a rhythmic chant. We want God. We want God. I mean, in effect, when he's there and over this course of 9 days, he says, you're not who they say you are. You are a people of God. And what happened when all these people came out and all these people were galvanized together, because what was communism predicated upon? A lie, fear, and isolation. But when people gather together, you feel this way, you feel this way, you care about your Catholic faith, you love Jesus. Oh my gosh, I didn't know there were so many of us. And it broke the chains of fear. Here's a quote from the homily. Christ cannot be kept out of the history of man in any part of the globe, in any longitude or latitude geography. The exclusion of Christ from the history of man is an act against man. Without Christ, it is impossible to understand the history of Poland. As I said, over and over again, he's saying to them, you are not who they, the communist dictators, say you are. And just to recap from the first night, communism was not just about an economic system. It was about redefining their past and setting the charter for the future and promulgating in a systematic way atheism. And that cry from all the depths of this millennium, I cry in the vigil of Pentecost, let your spirit descend and renew the face of the earth, the face of this land. And like a lot of languages, land and earth are the same word in Polish, and this was a really dramatic moment when he said that. As we said throughout the Pope's sermon, the crowd kept chanting, we want God, the family, the schools, the books, we want God. 7 hours after he had arrived, the crucial truth had been clarified by a million Poles' response to John Paul's evangelism. Poland was not a communist country. Poland was a Catholic nation saddled with a communist state. Now check this out. This is something that they did to preempt this visit, the communist government in Poland. Back in Poland, the regime was attempting preemptive damage control. In March, the Polish Communist Party sent out a secret set of instructions to teachers in the country's schools, which were later published in an underground periodical. The instructions suggest the mindset of the regime in the prelude to the Pope's return home. The Pope is our enemy. This was sent to all the teachers as a preparation for this upcoming visit. Due to his uncommon skills and great sense of humor, he is dangerous because he charms everyone, especially journalists. Besides, he goes for cheap gestures in his relations with the crowd. He just puts on a Highlander's hat, shakes all hands, kisses children. It is modeled on American presidential campaigns. Luckily, we managed to maneuver him out of the date May 8th, St. Stanislaus feast day. Again, he was martyred in 1079. This is the 900th year anniversary. He is dangerous because he will make St. Stanislaus the patron of the opposition to the authorities and the defender of human rights. Because of the activation of the Church in Poland are activities designed to atheize the youth. Not only cannot diminish, but must intensely develop. In this respect, all means are allowed, and we cannot afford any sentiments. The last leg of the trip is in Krakow, June 6th through 10th. Now, this is the communist worst nightmare because the battle is very much over the family and over the next generation, over the youth. A battle over who's going to win the mind and heart of the youth. And I don't know about you, but that sounds awfully familiar to our present circumstances. That night and for the next 3 nights, the streets surrounding the Archbishop's residence and the roof of the nearby houses were thronged with young people. High school and university students and workers celebrated a kind of papal street festival, clearly to the discomfort of the authorities. The first night, John Paul came out on the balcony and began a dialogue with the crowd, asking, who's making all this noise? I haven't heard so much noise since Mexico when they cried, El Papa, El Papa. The youngsters took the cue and began a rhythmic chant, El Papa, sto lat. Sto lat is kind of a Polish anniversary, a birthday song. It means like, may you live 100 years. Sto lat, sto lat. So, El Papa, sto lat, El Papa, sto lat. They called for a speech, but the Pope explained there wouldn't be any. He had a sore throat. So they sang together as they waited for the next 3 nights. To locals familiar with Karawanti's encyclopedic knowledge of Polish songs, what was even more amazing than this unprecedented public dialogue was the fact that during one such impromptu songfest, our former Archbishop had confessed publicly, I don't know this one, it must be new. So here you have the people enlivened. Here you have the young flocking to the Pope. And this is the window out of which it happened. So this is the Archbishop's residence, and that's the window so all this is going on right here. And he's hanging out the balcony, he's singing with them for 4 nights. In this 79 trip, he goes to Auschwitz. And just get this for a second. Just imagine this. He goes to Auschwitz, he prays in Maximilian Kolbe's cell. If you know the story of St. Maximilian Kolbe, he gave his life in place of another man who was chosen to be killed, to be starved to death. And if you read the story of Maximilian Kolbe, the way he died is amazing and profound. Step forward. Now first, no one steps out of line at a concentration camp. Approaches the officer, his name was Fritz, and says, I want to take his place. The officer, the counselor, he was so dumbstruck that a prisoner walked up to him with such audacity and agreed to let Kolbe take this man's place. This man who said, my wife, my kids. And that man survived. And that man's name is Francis Gajowniczek. On this trip, the Pope knelt in prayer, kissed the cement floor where Kolbe had lain in agony. The beauty of Kolbe's story is not just his death, but the way he ministered to his fellow prisoners. Almost 2 weeks praying the rosary, singing songs with them, helping these other prisoners die with dignity. And then left a bouquet of red and white flowers and an Easter candle brought from Rome. Outside block 11 was the Wall of Death. When we went there, we prayed a Divine Mercy Chapel right there, against which prisoners were executed by firing squad. En route to praying there, the Pope met and embraced 78-year-old Francis Gajowniczek, whose life Father Colby had saved by his self-sacrifice. Could you imagine this? Here the Pope embracing the very man whose life was saved by Colby's sacrifice. Again, the effect of this is described as a psychological earthquake. Here's some quotes from people that were there. 13 million Poles, more than one-third, had seen the Pope in person, virtually everybody had seen him on TV. And one thing the communists did for the coverage, they tried to intentionally not show the crowd on TV and just show him. And if they showed the crowd, they just show like some elderly person. They didn't want anybody at home to get the sense for the gravitas of what was happening. And as one person put it, it's almost like if you're watching a soccer game on TV and you never showed the ball. Like it was intentionally covered in such a way to minimize the impact that JP2 was having. Virtually everyone had seen him on television or radio. In 9 days, the country had lived through what political scientist Bogdan Tchaikovsky described as a psychological earthquake, an opportunity for mass catharsis, things that people had believed for decades, but could not affirm publicly he had said. Even the way he had said it made a difference. People felt and acted out the change before they could articulate what had happened. Without thinking much about it, they began behaving differently. Communism and common solidarity among the masses and had produced atomization, ill humor, and distrust. Prior to June 1979, it had been quite clear who they were. The regime, petty communist bureaucrats, the thugs, and the SB. But it was not clear who we were, how many of us there were, and whether we could trust one another. This was a 25-year-old physics student at the time. Pilgrimage moment. It was a moment in which the artificial world around us, the world of lies, heard by communism, simply collapsed. When he heard John Paul II claim the fact that in Polish earth and land are the same word, proclaim in Victory Square, come Holy Spirit, renew the face of this land, Ziba knew that something had to change, and that change would begin with himself. We might have to live and die under communism, but now what I wanted to do was live without being a liar. And again, if you really want to get after this, Weigel's The Final Revolution, breaking the chains of fear was, communism may well have fallen on its own, but the fact that it fell when it did and how it did, largely non-violently, is without question the influence of JP2 and the Catholic faith. As he puts it here, it spelled a different kind of leadership. Mass demonstrations of disaffection with the regime could have easily turned into riots. Instead, the character of a pilgrimage was retained, and the result was not bloody cataclysm, but a profound experience of social solidarity and communion. And in fact, so the sequence of events goes like this. Solidarity, Solidarność in Polish, became the first free trade union in the Eastern Bloc, founded by Lech Walesa in August of 1980. Nobody disputes this. This would not have occurred had it not been for the 79 trip. So it's the 79 trip that is really what leads to solidarity. It's solidarity that, to have a free trade union, which is, yes, about workers' rights, but it's very much about human rights, human dignity, Catholic faith, religious freedom. That was the crack in the armor that ended in 1989 with the fall of the Berlin Wall. Once you have solidarity, and once it continues to operate, there's no way totalitarianism is going to stay. It would have been unthinkable without the 79 visit. And we just made this point here. So what happens next? The assassination attempt. Again, this is at some point by the communists. This is a response to 79, a response to the solidarity movement that's arising, and now an attempt to eliminate him on the feast day of Our Lady of Fatima, May 13th, 1981. And as John Paul II would later say, one hand fired and another guided the bullet. There's a confession of the miraculous intervention that the most secular soul might have been tempted to conceive. That's the name of the assassin. The professional assassin had fired at point-blank range. Yet the bullet that struck the Pope missed the main abdominal artery by the merest fraction of an inch. Had the artery been struck, John Paul would have bled to death before being transferred from the Popemobile to the ambulance, where the bullet, which might have paralyzed him, missed his spinal column and every major nerve cluster in its potential path. And there's the cassock in which he was shot. So this is at the Be Not Afraid Center. It's right across from the Divine Mercy Shrine right there in Krakow. You can see the cassock with the bloodstains on display. 4 days later, so it's May 13th, pilgrims in St. Peter's Square hear a tape-recorded message where John Paul II concludes, I am particularly close to the two persons wounded together with me. So there's two pilgrims that the bullet ended up kind of ricocheting off of. I pray for that brother of ours who shot me, and whom I have sincerely pardoned. A year and a half later, he will go visit him in prison and forgive him in person. And Ashka's only question is, why did you not die? I know that bullet was a good shot. He was a professional assassin. United with Christ, priest and victim, I offer my sufferings for the church and for the world to you, Mary, I repeat, totus tuus, ego sum. I am totally yours. And in fact, if you go to St. Peter's Square, if you're facing St. Peter's Square, just to the right, and kind of up a little bit, there's a Marian kind of mosaic picture up there. And the story is that, so if you go to St. Peter's, all the statues of saints all over, like 142 of them, that as he lay dying, he looked up and saw these saints and he did see Mary. And so he was insistent that I want Mary up there somewhere because she, in her intercession, saved me. And again, he saw the days of Fatima as not an accident. At the same time, remember Wyszynski, Cardinal Stefan Wyszynski, who will be blessed. Stefan Wyszynski come this June. He was dying. They say that he tried to hang on. He wanted to hang on long enough to know that JPT was going to make it. Again, their relationship is really kind of beautiful in terms of the way it begins and the way it develops throughout. Wyszynski was dying. John Paul had sent Dziwisz. Dziwisz was his secretary in Krakow as archbishop, and then he brings Dziwisz with him to Rome. This is so DZ is a J sound. Dziwisz. He's the one who wrote that book, A Life with Carol, My 40-Year Friendship with the Man Who Became Pope. That book, Weigel's is like a very academic biography with lots of endnotes, lots of footnotes, things like that. The Dziwisz book is like listening to your grandfather tell stories about his old friend. It's pretty profound. I had some students who actually, when we went to Poland, and Dziwisz was retired Archbishop of Krakow, he said a mass on Holy Saturday, or Holy Thursday, I can't remember. And they rushed the sacristy and went up to talk to him afterward, and they got like 10 minutes with him. One of whom was Miguel Rodriguez. I think I've got, where's Michael here? And they asked him, what did you learn from JP2? And he just said, everything. Everything. That's all I can say, everything. Their last, the JP2 calls him, comes took place shortly after noon on May 25th. Wyszynski in great pain asked the short gasp of breath for the Pope's blessing. John Paul, as if in homage to the older man, what the older man had done and said in his life, said that he blessed the primate's mouth and hands. The primate died on May 28th. This scene is very movingly depicted in the movie I recommended like last time, Carol, the Man Who Became Pope. It's very well done. And then, so Dziwisz dies on the 28th. So he was shot on the 13th, and Dziwisz dies 2 weeks later. So what's next? Well, okay, actually, not quite yet. So a year later, John Paul II goes to Fatima on the anniversary. May 12th and 13th, 82. He'd gone there on pilgrimage at the first anniversary of the assassination attempt to give thanks to God and to Mary for his life having been spared. Arriving in Fatima, the Pope succinctly summarized his view of life, history, and his own mission in one pregnant phrase. He said this a lot. In the designs of providence, there are no mere coincidences. Again, he said that a lot. And again, it's not because history is fatalistic. It's not because we are not free. But it is that, and this is what Christian hope is all about. Despite appearances to the contrary, despite as bleak as it may look, God is at work. God is always at work, and he can write straight with our crooked lines, and he can weave the worst disasters into his divine providence. And that's what it means. In the designs of providence, there are no mere coincidences or accidents. Again, I refer you back to the Joseph narrative. When Joseph sees his brothers, Genesis 45, Genesis 50, he says, you meant this for evil, but God allowed it that good may come of it. It's not that we're not free. It's not that there are things that happen that are contrary to what God wants. But in spite of all that, God is the great jujitsu artist who can weave all these things into the tapestry of his providence. Martial law. So now we are... So he didn't die. We're at the end of the year in 81. The Solidarity, that, like Valenza, August 1980, the first free trade union in the entire Eastern Bloc, basically a national coordinating commission met in Gdansk to consider its options. Those who tried to make phone calls around midnight discovered that that was impossible. General Jaruzelski's coup against the nation had begun. At precisely 11:57 p.m. on December 12th, all 3.4 million private telephones in Poland went dead simultaneously. Roadblocks were set up throughout the country, and tanks rolled through the streets of Warsaw. Virtually the entire Solidarity leadership was arrested at their Gdansk hotels. Valenza, so the founder of it, he was an electrician, and then he becomes, when Poland is free, the first president of free Poland after communism falls. Valenza was seized at his apartment. Poles waking up early on Sunday morning, December 13th, discovered that their country had been invaded and occupied by its own army, assisted by the SB, whose computer at Gdynia had the last known address of every Pole. 4,000 men and women had been arrested overnight. So all of a sudden, and for the next year and a half, you have martial law. You have this, and again, what's happening is the regime is panicking. They're tightening their grip because they're getting nervous. It's not lifted until after the JP2's second trip to Poland, which is in 1983. On July 22nd, 1983, a month after the pilgrimage, martial law was formally ended. Now, in Jevish's book, he thinks that the 83 trip ultimately was vitally important because it helped secure the gains of 79. That the 83 trip was hugely important. And one of the things that JP2 wanted to make sure happened, that the regime did not want to happen, is he insisted on meeting with Valenza. Because that's intensely symbolic for JP2 to throw his weight behind Solidarity. As Jevish put it years later, the entire point of the pilgrimage from a public point of view was to demonstrate that the movement for freedom and solidarity hadn't died. That was why the meeting with Valenza was a very decisive moment. Poland, too, the 83 trip, created the spiritual and psychological conditions for the possibility of a revival of civil society in the aftermath of martial law. Now, I know this is long, but you got to bear with me on this one. This is something the regime did to discredit JP2 in February before the summer 83 trip. Just look at the extent to which they're willing to go to discredit him morally. The single most bold attempt to disintegrate John Paul II's second pilgrimage to Poland, so 83, was a triangular operation in early 83. The SB, so the Polish secret police, or the communist secret police in Poland, created a personal journal said to have been the work of Irina Kaniszewska, an employee of Tagaki Powszechny. So that, I haven't talked about that, I don't think. It's like a journal, magazine. It was one of the only places for kind of authentic Catholic stuff you could get throughout the period of the communist period. One of JP2's second article in there was all on Tiranovsky, called The Apostle. She was an employee there who had died some years before, so she's dead. She was abandoned by her husband. She would have likely drawn the sympathy of Cardinal Wojtyła. The SB intended to suggest by this diary that there was far more to the relationship and forged a diary in which Kaniszewska claimed to have been Wojtyła's lover. The plan was to plant and hide the diary in the apartment of Father Bardetsky, where it would then be discovered, quote, in a police raid. So here they've got a dead woman who was earlier abandoned by her husband. They forge a diary said to be of hers. They plant it, hide it. They're going to go find it where she claims to be Wojtyła's lover. This is in February of 83, all to discredit him before he comes in the summer. So one night, February 83, 4 SP activists from Independent Group D, knowing that Bardetsky was out, went to the priest's apartment on Sikorsky Place and planted the forged diary. The leader of the operation was Captain Grzegorz Petrovsky. Remember that name. After hiding the forger, Petrovsky went out with one of his Group D colleagues and got roaring drunk. Driving away from the bar, he crashed his car and was arrested by the police. Unable to control himself, or perhaps trying to get himself out of an embarrassing scrape, he bragged of being a member of Independent Group D and revealed what he'd been up to prior to his alcoholic binge. So he brags about what they had just done. This is why we know about it. Then the word of the operation began to leak out to the police. Meanwhile, Father Bardetsky found the not very well hidden diary, took it to the Krakow Curia, where it was quickly recognized for the forgery that it was. And as Weigel rightly comments, this just shows how frightened the martial law regime was of its own papal countrymen, even as it illustrates graphically the links of prevarication to which it was prepared to go in order to destroy his reputation and thus his moral authority. So again, do you feel like you, and I know we're just scratching the surface, but a sense for what communism was like? It wasn't just a great big monster we just shared it. It's very much an ideology and very much an intimidation regime that's going to cow you in line so you're afraid and you're isolated and you just play along so you can be left alone. How did JP2 bring about the fall of communism? Because he broke the chains of fear. When he said, "Be not afraid," in his 1978 installation mass, in his first homily, he's speaking directly to those under the Eastern Bloc. Because as he says, now that church of silence will speak with my voice. Let's check out a little bit more of this. Blessed Jerzy Papiełuszko. He was the chaplain of Solidarity. He's a young priest. So again, Solidarity, yes, free trade union, but don't just think workers and unions and protests. It's very much a Catholic movement. They have their own chapel. There's pictures of them having mass together at basically kind of shipyards where the workers are all having confessions. I mean, it's think human dignity, think human rights, think religious freedom, think Catholic faith. Don't just think workers. Yes, workers, but workers who are animated by their Catholic faith. In January of 1982, he began these monthly masses for the fatherland at age 35, drawing between 10 and 20,000 people a gathering. They would be outside the church on speakers, attending mass and listening to him preach. 10 to 20,000 gathering to hear this young priest. He was considered the voice of John Paul II in Poland. The young priest's message drew out the implication of John Paul's challenge to vanquish evil with good. Papiełuszko insisted on both nonviolence and resistance. Resistance was a moral obligation in the face of power, and nonviolence was the Christian way of resistance. So what happens to him? October of 84, he's beat to death. Father Jerzy Papiełuszko was driving back to Warsaw on the night of October 19, 1984, when three state security officers stopped his car. They beat him to death and threw his broken truss body into the Vistula, that's a river. Polish state radio announced the next day that he had disappeared and was presumed kidnapped. Thousands of Poles began to flock to Papiełuszko's church, where masses were said every hour. Lech Walesa, so founder of Solidarity, came and pleaded for nonviolence. Again, the message from JP2, the message from Papiełuszko, the message from all these people is, look, the communists will not be afraid of your guns. They won't be afraid of your violent retaliation, but they are deathly afraid of your confidence in proclaiming the truth. They are deathly afraid of your conviction of transcendent truth that is greater than the regime. For 10 days, the church and the adjacent streets were packed with tens of thousands of Poles fearing the worst. Their expectations were confirmed during a mass on October 30th when it was announced that Father Jersey's body had been recovered from the Vistula. Now, just follow this out here. One of the local priests, Father Luvick, a friend of Father Lushko, urged the crowd of the Cosmic Church to remember Christ weeping over Lazarus. Then Father Luvick recalled something very moving happened. 3 times they repeated after the priest, is that Mass, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And forgive us our trespasses. After your beloved chapel, the voice of J.P. Turopola, the hope to keep this going is beat to death, and you're saying, forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who have trespassed against us. The same guy who was the head of the forged diary is the head of the one who beat Papa Grushko to death. This is from this biography of Papa Grushko. During the trial, Petrovsky acknowledged that he had beaten the priest repeatedly with his fist and a specific, especially made 21-inch nightstick. Here's his cassock, which is preserved in St. Stanislaus. That's the one in Warsaw. So he's buried there at St. Stanislaus Koska in Warsaw. Not to be confused with St. Stanislaus Koska in Krakow, which is where Wojtyła and his father attended church in Krakow. Here's his cassock, which is preserved, bears the marks of rough fighting, proof that the priest tried to defend himself. The nature of his wounds, especially to his fingers, suggests that he was tortured. No doubt officials tried to extract from him information about the clandestine structures of so that's Solidarity in Polish, which he secretly attended. For 2.5 hours, in the case, Jerzy experienced a horrific Calvary. At the conclusion, the policeman bound his hands and legs and weighed down his feet with heavy stones. Then they threw his mutilated body like a common carcass into the icy waters of the Vistula. It was then 11:50 p.m. They did not know whether or not Jerzy was still alive. Let's hear from Jerzy's mother. Bent over with grief, her hair covered with a black shawl, Jerzy's mother spoke. It is very emotional for the others, but for the mother it is lifelong suffering. I do not wish on those who persecuted him that they should suffer as they made him suffer. May Jesus forgive them. May they be converted, and may they realize against whom they were fighting, not against my son, but against God. What I have here is some quotes from Papa Grushko himself. These are from his homilies of those masses to the Fatherland. Fear is the greatest failing of an apostle. It restricts the heart and contracts the throat. Fear is the greatest failing of an apostle. It restricts the heart and contracts the throat. Again, as we've seen, communism was very much propped up by fear. And those are the chains that J.P. wrote. And how often, again, I'm not trying to say it's the same thing, but how often are we afraid to be Catholic in the public square? How often, anytime when someone asks us about a moral issue, we say, well, for me, That little for me is a quiet but real acquiescence to the dictatorship of relativism, in the words of Pope Benedict Emeritus. For me, this, but maybe you think otherwise, that's acquiescing to the dictatorship of relativism. The duty of a priest is to speak the truth, to suffer for the truth, and if he must, to give his life for the truth. Let us pray that our whole life may be permeated with truth. It costs a lot to speak the truth. Only the weeds, in other words, petty and mediocre things, are cheap. But for the wheat of truth, as with all great and beautiful things, one must pay the demanding price of self-sacrifice. These are from, he led rosary meditations over the sorrowful mysteries the very night he died. And these were written so we have them. They're all on the back of that book. These are some of his last public words. And his theme throughout is from Romans 12:21. Where St. Paul tells us to overcome evil with good. To overcome evil with good. In order to overcome evil with good and safeguard human dignity, we must not resort to violence. Someone who has failed to win hearts and minds tries to prevail by violence. Again, violence can be fists, but violence can also be yelling and shouting down those with whom you disagree. Someone who has failed to win hearts and minds tries to prevail by violence. Every manifestation of violence is proof of moral inferiority. The most important and most consequential battles known in history have been the battles of human thought. The reason why solidarity conquered the world so quickly is that it did not fight with violence, but on its knees, with its rosary beads in hand. Let us pray that we may be freed from fear and intimidation, but above all, from the desire for revenge and violence. Whether it's Martin Luther King, whether it's Gandhi, whether it's here, the power of confident and courageous, nonviolent resistance that is anchored in the truth. That's what converted the Roman Empire. Christians going to their death saying, I forgive you. I love you. And Romans saying, that ain't natural. Whatever you got cooking over there, it ain't of human origin. Shifting gears once again here. This event, and so I've talked to some of you about this here, so this was in Denver, not too far. This is a pivotal moment in the church's history of the U.S. What you have here is there is a lot of doubt, a lot of skepticism. Holy Father, I mean, we don't have a pilgrimage tradition in the U.S., and you know what? I mean, the youth just aren't digging this whole Jesus thing anymore. It's more like sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And, you know, I don't know what y'all's experience is or was. When I talk to my students, I think where I grew up, there was no youth group. I didn't know, I grew up 11 hours from D.C. I didn't know a soul that went on the March for Life. I grew up 4 hours from Franciscan. I didn't know a soul that went to a student conference. I didn't even know there was daily mass. I didn't know what adoration was. I think, I know my experience is not unique. I mean, this was the 90s. And I think when I talk to college students, I think there's so much good that's happened that they often don't realize how scarce it was. Because their experience is often the fruit of this day. So more than a few U.S. bishops were among the doubters about World Youth Day 93. Many of them thought youth mission was virtually impossible. The cultural abuse and lifestyle of the teenagers of the 90s struck them as alien. So did government sort of drugs and sex. Between the bishops and restless contemporary American youth, there seemed to be a chasm that few church leaders thought it possible to bridge. The bishops' conference staff original expectations of a mere 60,000 for the whole event. That's what they said. Maybe you'll get 60,000. Had been more than tripled as over 200,000 young people from all over the world had registered. As the papal helicopter approached the stadium, we're talking Mile High, in the twilight, those inside, including John Paul II, could see that Mile High was filled beyond its normal capacity. 90,000 youngsters, half again as many as the skeptics had predicted for the entire 4-day event, had somehow crowded into the seats and over the stadium's playing field for the opening ceremony. The rain stopped as if on cue. But it was the noise that was beyond anyone's imagining as the young people chanted time and again, John Paul II, we love you. When the helicopter began its descent, the pilot, a combat veteran of the Vietnam War, had to fight to keep the chopper under control. The turbulence created by the youngsters' cheers, the pilot later said, was buffeting the aircraft so strongly that it was causing instability. So not only were the numbers falsified, look at this enthusiasm, making such noise that the chopper couldn't quite land properly. It was an eerie sensation. An American television reporter told her cameraman that this was being stage managed for maximum visual effect. All these kids were vacuum plants, brought in to show support for the program. The cameraman just laughed and said, sure, stadium full of plants. Final Mass, over 500,000. Looking out the window, the Pope saw the largest crowd in the history of Colorado, more than 500,000, with downtown Denver and the Rockies in the background. It was the solemnity of the Assumption of Mary. During it, John Paul continued to press the challenge of the previous night. The world, he suggested, could not wait for the young to become leaders in some ill-defined future. It needed their witness now. That meant entering the never-ending battle being waged for our dignity and identity as free spiritual beings and challenging the culture of death that tried to crush their desire to live life to the full. Do not be afraid to go out on the streets and into public places, he urged, like the first apostles who preached Christ and the good news of salvation in squares of cities, towns, and villages. This is no time to be ashamed of the gospel. It is the time to preach it from the rooftops. I can't tell you how many apostolates that you know well have their seeds planted here. Some of my mentors that changed my life, people like Dr. Sri, organizations like Focus, and countless others, were born here because of this moment that became a catalyst for so much growth in this country. He described this event as still living on in my heart as one of the highlights of my pontificate. One of the highlights of my pontificate. As Wyden recounts, and this is in 99, the long-term impact of the Denver World Youth Day coming measured in the mid-21st century. After succeeding decades have shown how John Paul's challenge actually shaped a 250,000 young lives, but its immediate effect was substantial. The bishops of the United States were also changed by the Denver World Youth Day. Those who thought the Pope's moral challenge could not be heard in the American cultural context had to think again, as did those who felt that youth ministry was simply impossible. The bishops also learned something about the vitality of Catholicism in America as a whole. The lack of interest in World Youth Day expected by some of the bishops' conference was dramatically falsified by the experience of tens of thousands of Catholic families across America preparing their youngsters for the pilgrimage to Denver. And he kind of, little playful jab with the American bishops. Says, this was even a surprise to the American Episcopate, called it the big surprise of '93. Now let's come back full circle. This is from Wyden's book, City of Saints. John Paul believed that for all the changes in culture, things had not changed all that much since his days at St. Florence. And the young people still wanted to be summoned to lead heroic lives. See, part of my conversion, to be totally honest with you, is it just, we finally clicked. And frankly, it was not until Dr. Sri that I had ever heard, especially a man, proclaim the gospel with confidence and conviction. Again, if the gospel is just be nice, well, Confucius could have taught me that, Plato could teach me that, Aristotle could teach me that. I get that lots of places. What's different about Jesus? This is the genius of JP2. That he understood that I don't respect you and I don't love you if I just water things down. If I just bring things down, it's an insult to you, and I felt that in my bones. Unlike those who thought Catholic light, Catholicism dumbed down doctrine and morally was the only possible strategy for youth ministry, the Pope, who as a young priest had gotten to know his young friends' lives from the inside through the pastoral method he called accompaniment, thought that what young people wanted was challenge and adventure. The challenge and adventure being more than the contemporary youth culture thought they could be. In a world that constantly pandered to the young, John Paul did not pander. He challenged. And his challenge rang true because of his transparent honesty. He did not ask anything of the young he had not asked of himself. Now, this is a quote from World Youth Day, Toronto, 2002. Although I have lived through much darkness under harsh totalitarian regimes, again, 39 years under Nazi occupation and the communists, he knows this well. I have seen enough evidence to be unshakably convinced that no difficulty, no fear is so great that it can completely suffocate the hope that springs eternally in the hearts of the young. You are our hope. The young are our hope. Do not let that hope die. Stake your lives on it. You've probably heard this part of it. We are not the sum of our weaknesses and failures. We are the sum of the Father's love for us. and our real capacity to become the image of his Son. God loves you just the way you are, but too much to leave you that way. That's what a father does. He loves his kids just the way they are. Yes, unconditionally, but too much to leave them that way. It was the summation of what he had taught and the challenge he had offered for more than 50 years. Never ever settle for anything less than the spiritual moral grandeur that the grace of God makes possible in your life. You will fail, you will fall. But that is no reason to lower the bar of expectation. Get up, dust yourself off, seek forgiveness through the sacrament of reconciliation. But don't ever settle for anything less than the greatness that Christ makes possible in you through the Holy Spirit. If you want the gospel in 2 verses, I mean, Jesus says, "Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect." Well, I can't do that. Well, bingo, you're right. That's what I need you to come to grips with so that I can transform you. Combine Matthew 5:48 with Matthew 19:26. With God, this is what he says to the rich man, with God all things are possible. Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. With God all things are possible. That perfection is not possible by our own power. No way. It is Christ in me. It is not I who live, but Christ who lives in me, that I may decrease and he may increase. It was a message and a challenge that first took shape at St. Florian's. And in that sense, World Youth Day did not begin in Rome in 1984. It began at St. Florian's in 1949 among the young people who would later be known as Kira Wojtyła's Shroudovisi. That's where World Youth Day started, and as he puts it elsewhere, I didn't start World Youth Day. The young people wanted Jesus. The young people started World Youth Day because they wanted Christ, and they wanted him badly. We're almost there. This is a quote from a philosopher, Alistair MacIntyre, from a 1981 book called After Virtue. So this is in 81. What matters at this stage is the construction of local forms of community within which civility and intellectual moral life can be sustained through the new dark ages, which are already upon us. And if the tradition of the virtues was able to survive the horrors of the last dark ages, we are not entirely without grounds for hope. This time, however, the barbarians are not waiting beyond the frontiers. They have already been governing us for quite some time. We are waiting not for a Godot, but for another doubtless very different Saint Benedict. To recreate and renew culture, authentic friendship, fellowship, and moral life, especially at the local level. As we began, 2 times Poland saved the West. 1683 Battle of Vienna against the Muslim Turks. They had lost that battle. Those Turks probably overrun Europe. 1920 miracle in the Vistula against the Red Army, the communists. If they lose that battle, communism probably overruns the rest of Europe. And I would propose a third, spiritually, through the life and thought of St. John Paul the Great. And Weibel more or less says as much. Just bear with me, this is absolutely worth it. The antidote to the despair, this is the end of his book, so look at that page number. 863. The antidote to despair amid the sundry madness of late modernity the Pope had long proposed was the experience of a community of self-giving love, in which we learn the destiny that awaits us on the far side of loneliness. The modern world is lonely and sad and despairing. They're looking for joy, but they're looking for it often in all the wrong places. Life within the community of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That is what St. Benedict had done in forming monastic communities in what history knows as the Dark Ages. That is what Kira Wojtyła did throughout his distinctively 20th century life. If the Church of the future knows John Paul II as John Paul the Great, it will be for this reason. At another moment of peril, when barbarisms of various sorts threatened civilization, a heroic figure was called from the Church to meet the barbarian threat and propose an alternative. In the case of Pope Leo the Great, the barbarians in question were Attila and his Huns. In the case of Gregory the Great, the barbarians were the Lombards. In the case of John Paul II, the barbarism threatening civilization has been a set of ideas whose consequences include barbarous politics, defective humanisms that, in the name of humanity and its destiny, create new tyrannies and compound human suffering. If you ask John Paul II, the tragedy of the Nazis, the tragedy of communism, the tragedy of abortion, The tragedy of sexual exploitation and using is all from not coming to grips with the grandeur of the inviolable dignity of every single human life, whether at the point of death, or whether in the womb, or whether on death row. This is all of a piece against the new barbarism set loose in the world by absolutized fragments of truth, which is what often happens. I had a professor said, if you want to understand modernity, imagine Catholicism and blow it up and have all the pieces scattered but not integrated. So social justice there, environment there, human rights there, but maybe distorted. It's not that some of those things aren't right, but they're lacking integration, and they're lacking their proper framework in which to understand them as a unified whole. Throughout more than 50 years of priestly ministry, you are greater than you imagine, and greater than the late modern world has let you imagine. Now, we're almost there. This Yugoslav dissident said what impressed him the most about John Paul II was that he was a man utterly without fear. That fearlessness, the Weigel comments, is not stoic. It is unmistakably Christian fearlessness. In Christian faith, fear is not eliminated, but transformed through a profound encounter with Christ and his cross, the place where all human fear was offered by the Son to the Father, setting us all free from fear. So what's the answer for us? What's the takeaway for us? Let me just give you 3 Polish phrases that, for me and my students and so many of us, people that we're working with, have become catchphrases. Words that identify what we're trying to build. Środowisko. So that's the name of this community of young people that John Paul II reached out to and stayed in touch with the rest of his life. As a catchword for virtuous friendship. Czas ucieka, wieczność czeka. Time flies, eternity awaits. This was on the sundial of the church he grew up in. How about virtuous friendship informed by the perspective of eternity? Time flies, eternity waits. And here's what happens when communities gather like that. You might know this one. Na zdrowie. This is Polish for cheers. Because when communities gather for a transcendent good, virtuous friendship, and guided by the perspective of eternity, they have a good time. Saints aren't sad. They're full of joy. And what happens, and I've seen this among students over and over again, is they have a better time and more fun in a środowisko environment than the hookup culture. They have more fun than the party culture. And all of a sudden, it's like a ball of fire that people want to be a part of. Like, I want some of that, because this loneliness or this despair or things that I thought they were good, but I could just tell they're broken and I'm empty. I want some of that. I've got my beautiful wife here because we've been living this together, and we're just going to just chat just briefly, just practical examples of how we've been able to kind of, again, build up students with these kinds of communities.
Yeah. We only have 5 minutes, but I don't want to keep you because I know you have a phenomenal life waiting for you and it's late. But I just told Swaff, I was like, okay, I travel all over the country and I get to give talks, and I'm like, no, I'm telling you, the better and cooler Swafford is not here, right? Like, I can't tell you how excited I am that you guys got time with him. His classes at Benedictine fill in like 5 minutes. And there's a lot of students that don't get in even until like their senior year. And so our dear friend, Father Brian, he's like, I just want you to come like give a class. Like I want them to experience like what it would be like. And I was like, Swaff, you're gonna put a 15-week class in 8 hours. Go team, right? Like, good luck, have fun with that, right? But I just wanted, the kids and I came over, we've been in town all week just loving Hayes, and we went to the museum today and it was so fun. And I want to thank you for having us, but I just want to tell you, like, I know one of our mentors was Scott Hahn, and we used to say that it was like drinking from a fire hydrant. So if you feel that way right now, I just highly recommend going back and listening to them again. Like Swaff, he drops like bombs, like every once in a while. He'll just like, and you're like, oh, stop talking, I have to like meditate on that for an hour. You know what I mean? Like, so I just want to encourage you, like he just threw a lot at you, and that was amazing. And I know it was hard to come all the nights, maybe you only come for like an hour or one, but they did record them if you want to hear them. So one, I just want to thank you for having us to Hayes. And then two, we both just really encourage you to get to know John Paul II, St. John Paul the Great. I know he just gave you a lot, but we always say certain saints kind of stalk you. I don't know if you guys have ever had that, like, why is St. Faustina everywhere, right? Like, for both of us in our life, St. John Paul the Great has been that from the very beginning of even our friendship and our dating relationship. And so I just wanted to thank you for coming. And then these three words. Swaff and I, we took 50 college students abroad to Italy in 2018, the spring. And our 4 kids at the time, and now we have John Paul. Hashtag shocking, right? So John Paul is 9 months, but we took our 4 kids and 50 college students, and we lived in Florence for 3 months. And one of the weeks, we actually took anybody that wanted to go, we took them to Poland with us on a little pilgrimage. And it was life-changing. And so I just wanted to come and say thank you, and then also I really encourage you to like take even just some of the little things that you heard and just really ask St. John Paul the Great, like, how do you want this to play out in my life? Because we call him the greatest vessel to evangelize through, because he is the Catholic homecoming king. I say that, I think he's the Catholic homecoming king. He's one of those people where you're like, you're too good to be true, but you are. You know what I mean? Like, he just is amazing. And so I just hope you got a lot out of this, and so like I said, Swaff and I are just so grateful that you guys are open to even just like learning a little bit about it. But yeah, I just wanted to come and say, I think he's amazing. I think he's brilliant. He's a little hidden gem up in Atchison, Kansas. So I just love him. But I know that it can be overwhelming. So I think he should write a book. That's my personal opinion. I think he should write Why You Should Love JB2 and I Do Too, something like that. I don't know. Go team. But yeah. So go for it. I don't know. Is that kind of? We have some other stuff too.
It's in prayer. Yeah, but if I could just thank you again, I mean, it means the world. I don't know if I can get my students to come voluntarily 4 nights in a row.
Absolutely not.
So to all of you, thank you so much. It really means the world. It's been a blessing. 1,000 times over.
And we'll be out in the hallway too. And I told the kids they had to come out and be social and be fun. They're playing the new Monopoly has a new voice game where the bankers, have you guys ever seen this? They're obsessed. So I told them, I was like, come be social. So they're gonna come out and hang out, and they wanna come meet you. And then Swaff and I will be in the hallway too, just hanging out. I'd love to give you a hug, tell you you're amazing. You don't hear it enough. But just know that we're praying for you up in Atchison. We're very proud of you. And keep fighting on, yeah. Fight on, fighter.
But glory be.
Yeah.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Saint Benedict, Saint John Paul the Great. In the name of the